when we start to identify that there is a group that may be different to our group, then that creates a bit of tension within the in-group and the out-group. The in-group is the one that you belong to, the out-group being the different. And Solomon Asch, I think I pronounced that name correctly. He was a psychologist in the 1950s. He was doing a lot of his work. And you may have heard of this, or our listeners may have heard of some of this. He got a bunch, I think it was 123, which is a good number to remember, 123 participants in a study that measured lines. And the lines that they saw were, there were 2 identical lines, and there were another 2 lines that were not the same. And then there were about 4 or so people in a group that were put together, and they said, okay, which lines do you think are the identical ones? And then you had the experiment, the person who was part of the experiment. Then you had people who were not part of they were part of the experiment, but they were undercover. They were all told which one to select. And so they always selected the incorrect one. And then the guy who's there, he would point and at the one that he thought matched, but then they would often change their selection. But actually, no, I do think it's this one to match the group.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the 5th person with the white T-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2.
2.
2.
2.
2. 3.
3.
3.
3.
But on the 3rd trial, something happens.
2. 2.
2.
2. 2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
1 out of every 3 participants did this regularly. So about 30-some% of the participants did this whenever they had the incorrect measure. And at least 75% of the participants did it at least once. And so there were certain situations where the majority of them did it at least once when they knew it was, no, this is the right one, but then they changed their answer based on the people that were around them.
They went along with the group for different reasons.
1.
1.
They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me.
1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1.
1.
1.
2. 1. 2. 2. 2.
I know they're wrong, but why should I make waves?
2.
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level of his response.
2. 2. 2. 2.
In the previous experiment, the naive subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Asch gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the 3rd position, who also gives the correct response.
1.
1. 2. 1.
2.
With a partner, yielding drops to only 5% of the critical trials compared to 37% without a partner. Although subjects report warmth and good feeling toward the partner, they typically deny that he played a role in their own independence. The partnership variation shows that much of the power of the group came not merely from its numbers, but from the unanimity of its opposition. When that unanimity is punctured, the group's power is greatly reduced.
You see the same thing where there have been other experiments where people would be in a room doing a psychological test, and the rest of the people the majority of the people in that room were part of the experiment, and they were on the sides of the researchers, which were told what to do. And then very slowly, smoke would start to come from underneath the door. And then everyone ignored the smoke, except the people who were like looking around, and they would look and they'd be like, well, what's going on? No one's looking. People are like, pointing. It's like, hey, can you see that? And people are like, what are you talking about? And they go back to their work. And it kind of goes to show that we tend to adapt and adjust based on the group that we find ourselves in. And this can create a sense of cognitive dissonance for some people, which I'd like to pick your brain on.
Yeah, sure. Well, cognitive dissonance is really just that uncomfortable feeling that occurs when you're confronting two opposing kind of, or you have two opposing thoughts or ideas, and we don't like that. We like things to have clarity and certainty, and where we tend to look for that all the time. We're problem solvers. We don't like to sit with uncertainty, and so when
it's kind of like, sorry to cut you off, people who have one view of a person or a friend of theirs, and then someone else comes in and saying, "I know this is how he really is." And it's kind of like, how do you balance those two sorts of things? Really interesting thing is we tend to believe gossip more than we believe truth. And there have been so many different experiments that have validated that in social psychology, that we're more enticed towards gossip than we are enticed towards finding out and hearing the truth of the situation. And it's hard to kind of hold on to those simultaneously, but please continue.
Yes, and I think that point that you've just made is a really important one, because cognitive dissonance can be a really important phase in someone learning something new. So you just made gave the example there of someone having a view of a person, and then new information comes to light that may, as it's integrated, may shift their view of that person, or it may, with other evidence, be rejected. But cognitive dissonance is actually an important thing to occur if we're going to develop our understanding and our knowledge about things, because as new ideas are introduced and integrated and perhaps change our views on things, that's really, in essence, what happens with someone who has prejudiced ideas and then actually encounters somebody who blows that sort of simplified idea that they have formed about that person out of the water. And they now are, in that position of having to change the way that they view it. Certainly in the prison system, we saw this a lot, because there's very strong in and out groups within the prison system. Prison officers, those who sort of adhere to a really, a group think kind of mindset will refer to prisoners as crims. They're all sort of seen as being equally untrustworthy and equally hopeless. And then on the other side, the prisoners who really adhere to the sort of, that in-group, they look at the prison officers and call them screws, and they're not deserving of the time of day. And that serves lots of purposes for those people. But then you have these moments where a prisoner who has had this view encounters an officer who takes the time to get to know them, who treats them with respect, who breaks the mold that they have in their mind. And that person has this cognitive dissonance. They don't know how to respond when that person treats them kindly, when they've assumed that every officer is going to treat them badly. And that can be a moment of change to go, well, if one can be different than what I had thought, perhaps there are others as well.